So you just started training jiu-jitsu. You're absolutely infatuated. You absolutely love it. But there's some extremely common questions that students have that seems to never get talked about. No one ever tells you, what is it supposed to be from white to black belt? What is that journey like? Here's the common struggles. Here's what I expect from you. In this video today, we're gonna break down some of those things and get into more details to help you guys out. How's it going, everybody? My name is Chasen. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I've been teaching and training jiu-jitsu now for 14 plus years. So if you guys like all things jiu-jitsu, this is probably a pretty good channel for you guys to check out. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. We've had a lot of new subscribers lately, and I greatly appreciate everyone and their support. Also, just so you guys know, there's something called a super like that's down there below where you guys can basically leave me a tip, and that basically just goes back into producing better videos for you guys coming up. So the origin of this video and why I wanted to make it is because, like I said, I've been teaching and training jiu-jitsu for close to 14 plus years. I was having a conversation with a blue belt student of mine the other day, and we were just talking about his journey and what he expected out of jiu-jitsu. I think that when we walk through the door for the first time in jiu-jitsu, we're gonna learn all these great techniques. We're gonna get a great workout in. This community is gonna be great. But a lot of times there's some things that derail that journey that I think if students could have a basic idea or expectation or path to follow, it would help them stay on the mats longer. But I feel like one of the main ones is no one ever sits down with students mainly and kind of gives them a timeline or layout of what the path looks like from white to black belt. And I completely understand it's all unique and it's all different to you. My path is not going to be the same as yours. However, after teaching for 14 years and promoting students to all of the ranks over my time, there is a general flow of time and a general flow of things to expect at each belt. I'm going to break it down into three main categories when we see each belt, because I think that's the easiest way to understand. The first thing we'll talk about, the time expectancy. So how long should you be at each belt? How many years or how long should you be at each belt? The next one is going to be training mindset or feeling, or even maybe some techniques, what to do, actually the physical idea. And then the third thing is going to be some advice that I would have for you during that belt that will help you either stay on the mat or kind of direct your training a little bit more. So I think those are the easiest ways for us to dive deep into it. First off, let's start at white belt. Just so you guys know, I've done some videos about why white belts struggle or why you'll quit at jiu-jitsu as a white belt. So you can check those out here, and they're going to kind of reiterate some of these points I'll talk about. At white belt, let's first start with that timeline perspective. For most people, they will be a white belt in jiu-jitsu for 1 to 3 years. I'm talking about people who are training consistently. Hopefully that doesn't need to be said. I'm not talking about you white belts that have been a white belt for 14 years and your belt is like all frayed up. That's gonna be the same thing for blue belts and the same thing for other purple belts, because I know you guys exist too, but we're gonna generally talk about people who are training consistent. 1 year is probably the middle most common time. 1 to 2 is probably most common, but I would give it 3 for some people, just depending on how they train. If you're above a year, basically, if you get your blue belt in less than a year, you're probably a person that was pretty obsessed and you trained all the time and you just absorbed all the information. Congratulations, that's super awesome. That's not always a great thing, which you'll see why here in a second. Because continuing that momentum and keeping that pace is hard as life presents itself and starts challenging you. Just as a quick example for myself, I was a white belt for 2 years. What actually helped me finally become a blue belt was my instructor approached me at the time and asked me to start helping him teach some kids classes and become an assistant instructor, and he needed me to be a blue belt. So he kind of pushed me in that direction, and so that kind of pushed my own button gear to start training more and to become a blue belt, right? But usually anything under a year is pretty quick. Anything over about 2 years is probably a little bit longer than normal. That probably means that you're not training as frequently, or there's been some hiccups in your training along the way, but that's the general time period you can expect to generally be a white belt. If you're liking this type of information, make sure you leave me down a comment below about which belt you're at, what rank are you at, what are you struggling with right now. Share with me, I would love to hear about it. Now, what do I expect technique wise or training wise as a white belt? I'm trying to get you from white to blue belt, and so that means you need to have the basic understanding or the basic knowledge of the fundamentals. Now, there's a distinct difference between knowledge and skills, and that's going to be a big understanding and transferring as we go through the ranks. So let me break down the difference between knowledge and skill. A knowledge piece is you knowing an arm lock, you know the steps, and you know the basic idea of how to do an arm lock. Turning it into skill is doing it against someone who's resisting, someone who's trying to stop the move. So that would be like the idea of cooking. So you know the ingredients, you're reading the ingredients, and you see all the steps of how to make this dish, but then the actual act of cooking, putting all of the ingredients together, baking or boiling or cooking or whatever the actions require, and then the food comes out actually edible, not just terrible, but edible, and it's good. That is skill. From white to blue belt, I don't expect always a tremendous amount of skill. I expect solid knowledge of the basics, right? I expect you to be able, if I mount you, you can do an elbow escape pretty proficiently, like 90% correct. You can tell me the name, you can demonstrate the step-by-step techniques with mild or no resistant. And so I expect you to be able to do that, the basics, basic submissions, basic escapes, basic techniques, basic understanding of how those positions work. You can have a conversation, you can read the ingredients on the cookbook, and you can actually understand what they're talking to you about. Now the skill starts to transfer more later, which we'll get into. Usually some advice I'd white belts into is be careful of shiny object syndrome. A lot of times we start getting infatuated. The first time we get exposed to something is the most excited we're gonna be, and we get really gung-ho. If you're like me, you get hyper-focused on certain things, and so you start Googling and buying all the latest instructionals, and you start attending all these classes, doing all these privates, and just constantly absorbing so much information. The one thing I would tell you is slow down. It's okay. No one wants you to be the world's greatest white belt. I want you to be a great jiu-jitsu practitioner, whatever that means. So slow down, because keeping that pace is very, very challenging to do as life approaches. I know you're saying, Chase, I got big goals. I want to be a world champion one day, and I want to get there fast. I'm gonna tell you, burnout's a real thing, and life doesn't, you don't know what it presents itself. You can train a lot. I'm not telling you not to train. If you have the ability to train 7 days a week, absolutely do it, but just be careful about all of the constant information absorbing and the shiny object syndrome. Focus on the knowledge of the basic understanding of jiu-jitsu. If you guys need help on being able to do that and guiding your training, check out my free resource down below. I have an acceleration guide, but I also have a blueprint training that I go into more detail. It's about an hour long, and I actually teach you the step-by-steps on how to develop some kind of training system. Let's talk about blue belt. Students who are going from blue to purple. So you can expect to be a blue belt for close to 2 to 5 years. In the past, I probably would have said 3 to 5, but it seems like more people that I talk to or more people that I see, they're spending less time at blue belt. Usually, if you take any less than 2 years to become a blue belt, you're cooking through. You're really training a lot. Maybe you're naturally skilled, doing a lot of lessons. I don't know. You're really going fast. Me personally, I was a blue belt for 4 years. I was an instructor, and I was training like 6 to 7 days a week. I was teaching classes. I was teaching kids classes. I was doing adult classes. I was still in college, and so I was training a lot, and I was still a blue belt for 4 years. Now I was terrible. So maybe it just took me longer and I need a little bit more seasoning. For most people, it's probably going to be, closer to 2 to 5. Now, teaching is obviously better possibly than it is now. Students have access to information more. Instructionals are a lot easier to find. There's more training partners, right? So there's a lot of variabilities on why students are becoming belts much faster, right? So what do I expect out of a blue to purple belt? Well, I did a whole video on that right here. So if you guys want to get more in depth, you can definitely check that video out, but I'll give you kind of a quick recap. I expect from blue to purple students to take that basic knowledge that I talked about as a white belt, and it actually turns into skill. So they can actually start proficiently doing these techniques against people who are trying to stop them of lower level. So other white belt students, other lower blue belts, possibly other blue belts who are their skill, but it's not just total getting smashed all the time. You're actually able to make your techniques start to work. Your knowledge has turned into skills, developed an ability in the guard, some skills in the guard. You can do it against people who are trying to stop. And that's what you're doing all the time in training in jiu-jitsu, is you're developing that skill, but it should be a little bit more honed. You should be able to do that now with more techniques than you were at white belt. Also, a lot of times at blue belt, this is your curiosity phase. This is the phase that I want you to be exploring and figuring out new guards and other positions and become like curious and explorers. That's what you should be from blue to purple, because you should, by the time you become a purple belt, you should have a good foundation of some basic ideas of all of these different things that can happen to you. You should also probably have a thing or two that you're pretty good at, where even if it was a really good white belt or a really good blue belt, that you can really kind of start to enforce and impose on them. So what do I expect from purple to brown? What is that timeline? Well, usually you're going to spend 2 to 3 years at purple belt going to brown belt. I believe I was 2.5, 3 years, so I was closer to the end of that. Once again, if you fly through your purple belt, if you get it in less than 2 years, kudos to you. And if you're a little bit over 3 years, I think that's a little bit long. Purple to brown is half of the amount of time for most people. It is from blue to purple, is because you actually know how to practice jiu-jitsu, which is super important to understand. This is one thing that I didn't realize I was doing actually at purple and at brown belt, but I was developing a way to actually train jiu-jitsu. No one ever sits down and teaches you how to actually train jiu-jitsu and get better. You just kind of keep ramming your head against the wall until finally something works out. But really what happens is that you are subconsciously kind of figuring it out. From purple to brown, you have enough skill that you're able to kind of play around with some things and develop new techniques, and you're starting to figure out how you can take a technique from being, not very good to being somewhat better. I even wish I would have figured out how to do that much earlier. I think I was maybe around a later brown belt whenever I figured it out. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I wish someone would have grabbed me at like white or blue belt and been like, here's actually how you train jiu-jitsu. Here's actually how you focus on picking your techniques to train, because you want to go in the straightest line possible, not this giant zigzag pattern. What do I expect from a purple to brown? I expect that you should have 3 or 4 laser sharp moves. At brown belt, what you want to think about is basically, to me, a brown belt is just a black belt that needs a tiny bit more seasoning. That means that by the time you become a brown belt, you need to have about 3 or 4 things that if Gordon Ryan walked into the gym, you have a sequence or a series or a style of techniques that you're gonna try first. And that's something that I didn't really do. And I found myself doing these same things, but I didn't identify that's what it was and make it razor sharp like I probably should have. Purple belt, when you first get it, you've acquired all of this knowledge, you've acquired all of these things. Now at brown belt, it's up to you to refine it and make it razor sharp, and pick 2 or 3 and make them laser sharp. Basically what's happening at brown belt is you're not the black belt yet. So the black belts are still kind of crushing you, and they're still trying to keep their thumb on top of you, but you have really good blue belts and purple belts that are nipping at your heels. To me, brown belt was one of the hardest belts because it has a lot of expectation and you're so close to achieving the black belt, but you have other people who are just as good nipping at your heels, and you feel like you can't crush them. So you feel like, man, I'm not even close to my black belt yet. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that happens at brown belt. Brown to black belt. How much time do we spend at brown to black belt? I think most of the time, a pretty safe assumption is 1 to 3 years. I've been hearing lately that a lot of times people are staying at brown belt much longer. I think that's because of competition, which I completely understand. There is a difference between a recreational brown belt, someone who's just training jiu-jitsu for fun, and someone who wants to compete at brown belt. Because if you really want to be a serious competitor at brown belt, black belt is a whole other animal of a division. Sometimes an instructor might give a brown belt or keep somebody at a brown belt based upon what their own journey is. So earlier in the video, I talked about everyone's journey is different. Brown belt is probably one of the biggest belts where we feel a big discrepancy between brown belts. Sometimes a brown belt might get his black belt if he's more of a recreational guy and he's really salty, but he's probably not going to go win worlds. But you might have this other brown belt who's been a brown belt for years in the training room, and his belt is falling apart and he wins like 90% of the tournaments that he goes into. That's probably because he wants to compete at black belt, so his instructor wants to make sure he has enough seasoning and he's ready to be able to do that. Because even at black belt, there's quite a bit of difference between a brand new black belt and then like a 3rd degree or a 4th degree black belt who's been a black belt for a while. Just to re-summarize that whole time period, you could be a black belt as quick. I think if you add up everything that I said, on the quick end, it's probably going to be close to 5 to 6 years. That would be very, very quickly. And then on the long end, if you trained consistently, you're going to be closer to that 12 years. What do I think is a good recommendation for most people? Most people, I would expect them to achieve a black belt in anything between 8 to 10 years. That's fairly doable. All of those timetables that I spread out there, you can kind of track the progression in the belt at each time period. To me, I wish someone would have sat down and told me what I should be thinking about at white belt, what I should be thinking about at blue belt, what I should be thinking about at purple belt, and so on and so forth, and just kind of give a general time. Because now to me, I have either a goal to kind of shoot for, now I have some kind of path that someone has talked to me about, because when I came walking in the door, I had no idea. Obviously, nothing is set in stone. Your journey is unique. For some of you guys, you might totally disagree with everything that I said, and that's absolutely fine. We don't all have to agree. I'm just telling you, as a guy who's been teaching for 14 years in training, this is the common paths that I see people travel on. Now, I could break down each belt and I could go into a lot more detail on each belt, and that might be a future video. So if you guys like this kind of information, make sure down below you check out the free resource about my acceleration guide. Also check out my blueprint training. It's only $5, but it's an hour long, and I break down this whole system and I give you guys a way to actually identify how you're training and doing jiu-jitsu. Also, I have a coaching program, so if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, where I can actually help guide you and direct you, then make sure you reach out to me and we can get you guys taken care of. Hopefully this video helped you guys out, and until next time, I'll see you later.